This podcast episode is brought to you by Astrologer Connect, your premier source for quality astrology readings.
Hello, my name is Christopher Renstrom, and I'm your weekly horoscope columnist here on Astrology Hub. And this week, I wanted to talk to you about the upcoming Sun-Neptune Square taking place on December 14th. Now, these Sun-Neptune squares are pretty famous. They're generally regarded by astrologers as being a sort of disillusionment crisis that takes place. In other words, you were sort of enthralled to something, or you believed something to be true, and then because of this Neptune Sun square, you're going to be disabused of any notion. There's a sort of waking up from having been under the spell of something, not unlike an audience member waking up from a hypnotic spell where they've been made to squawk like a chicken in front of a roaring crowd for the last 5 minutes. These Sun-Neptune squares often leave people feeling embarrassed and a little bit ashamed, and that's pretty much the typical interpretation of them. I happen to think that there's a little bit more going on with the Sun-Neptune square than is often acknowledged in astrological readings. And to me, what a Sun-Neptune square represents, especially a Sun-Neptune square taking place in the Jupiter-ruled signs. The Sun will be in Sagittarius, Neptune will be in Pisces. So for me, what this Sun-Neptune square represents is a moral dilemma. Something that comes to mind when I think of moral dilemmas is the wonderful Greek tragedy written by Sophocles, the tragedy entitled Antigone. Antigone is basically one of those plays where you're kind of divided between the two sides that are involved in this great conflict. And that, I think, is really the key to understanding how the square works. Antigone is the story of a 14-year-old girl. She is the daughter of Oedipus Rex. You may be familiar with the story of Oedipus Rex. He is the fellow who kills his father and marries his mother. And upon learning that, blinds himself and throws himself into self-exile. Well, he had a few children by his marriage to his mother, his wife and his mother. Her name was Jocasta. And he had a few children by her, and one of his children was Antigone, who is the protagonist of this play. Now, Antigone, as I said, is a 14-year-old girl, and the play opens with two bodies basically laid on stage. And these are the bodies of her two slain brothers, Eteocles and Polynices. Now, the reason that they're dead on stage is that there has been a civil war that has just been fought in the city-state of Thebes. The kingdom of Thebes was ruled by Oedipus, and Oedipus, out of his shame when he exiles himself, leaves the two brothers in charge of the city. The two brothers, Eteocles and Polynices, immediately have a civil war. Eteocles is on the side of Creon, who's basically the brother-in-law to Oedipus. And so he's fighting for things to stay the same in the city after the passing of his father. And Polynices is in revolt against his brother. He doesn't feel like the government is just or good, and he feels like he has a claim to the throne, and so the two brothers are going to have it out. And they actually wage an enormous war, which brings a great deal of difficulty to the city. The climax of this war is when the two brothers engage in single-handed combat and they kill one another. As I said, Eteocles was fighting for the Thebes that had been ruled and is being currently ruled by Creon, Oedipus's brother-in-law, and Polynices was fighting to declare his claim to the throne. Both of them are dead on stage at the beginning of the play. Now, Creon, who is now the regent power following the death of the brothers, has declared that Eteocles is to have a proper burial, that he was a champion of the city of Thebes, that he was trying to protect the people within its walls, and in honor for his heroism and his valor, he is to be buried, given full ceremonies of Theban society. Now, Polynices, on the other hand, is branded by Creon as being the rebel. As being the person who was stirring up trouble, someone who was trying to basically stage a coup and overthrow his brother. And so Creon dictates that Polynices's body will be left out on the battlefield where it fell, left out on the battlefield to become the food of carrion birds and feral dogs and worms and other creatures that prey upon corpses. Needless to say, it's an undignified end to a prince of the city, but more importantly, it's basically regarded as a crime. A crime. It's a crime against the gods. Now, the argument on Creon's side is that he declares that Polynices' body will not be buried because he was a traitor, and he should have the fate of a traitor, and so his body is left unburied to be preyed upon by dogs and birds. But it was a custom in Greek society that all bodies were to be buried, because it's only when a body is buried that the soul can properly depart the body and enter into Tartarus, or enter into the underworld. For a body to be left exposed was to basically doom the soul of that body to an eternal exile where it existed between worlds, the world of the living and the world of the dead. And Antigone, being sister to both brothers, feels a fidelity to Polynices, that he be buried as well. And so that is her intent, but she runs afoul of Creon, who dictates that not only is the corpse of Polynices to be left rotting on the battlefield, but that anyone who attempts to bury the body of Polynices will immediately be condemned to death. So Antigone tries to get her sister on her side to bury the body, and her sister is like, well, I want to, and I support you in this effort, but our uncle, and Creon is indeed, because he's the brother-in-law to Oedipus, the brother to Jocasta, our uncle has decreed that this isn't to be done, and maybe we should honor that. Maybe we should obey that. That is civic law. You know, he is the king of Thebes. And Antigone says, I'm not hearing anything of it. I'm not hearing anything of it. Polynices might have been fighting on the opposite end of the battle, but what's happened here is a tragedy. It's the death of our two brothers, and we are bound by blood. We are bound by blood to bury our brother Polynices. Will you come with me? And her sister says, no, I cannot come with you. And if anything, I think you're being too extreme. I think you're being too passionate. You're only a 14-year-old girl. And what we have to remember about Greek society at this time is that women had a lower rank than men. They did not have the right to vote. They did not have a voice in the government, and they were basically seen as subservient to the men in Greek society. So for the Greek audience watching this Greek tragedy, Antigone is a little bit of, well, not a little bit. Antigone is very much an alarming figure. She's a 14-year-old girl, unmarried, who is going to go against the king of this society. And no matter, even if she is doing right by her brother, certainly the laws of society, the laws of government supersede her own particular aims. And in this regard, Antigone is really kind of the predecessor to other young girls who go against the system, like Joan of Arc, for instance, or Greta Thunberg. You know, there are these girls who are going against society that people regard as maybe being too impassioned, you know, and maybe they should dial it back a bit or something along these lines. But Antigone will not be compromised. She will not be muted. Okay, and she insists on burying her brother, and she goes out in the night to bury him. And of course, she's discovered and exposed and brought in front of Creon. where they have this argument. And it's this debate between the two sides. Creon is saying, you have gone against my law, my will. I am the ruler of this city. Everyone must obey what I have to say. And later audiences kind of find him tyrannical and really kind of like the evil figure, but you kind of have to cut Creon a little slack. Oedipus's family has caused a lot of problems for the city of Thebes, okay? Oedipus himself killed the former king and married his wife, and then came to a discovery of this after siring children. So he really became this plague, this shame to Thebes. Oedipus then has these children, Eteocles and Polynices, who fight a civil war over the city and cause even more grief and hardship to the city. And so Creon, not really being a blood relative, is stepping in and bringing order to a society that has been out of kilter for a very long time. And now he's faced with this 14-year-old girl, who is saying to him quite defiantly, I answer to a higher power. I answer to a higher power, and I am answering to a power that is higher than yours, Uncle Creon. And Creon says, well, what power are you answering to, Missy? And she responds, I am answering to the gods. And she's right. She is answering to the gods. To leave a body unburied is not only an insult to, or humiliation to the deceased, but it goes against nature. It goes against the laws of nature. And the laws of nature are the laws of the gods, and the gods insist that all bodies be buried so that the souls can be deposited in the underworld. This is the understanding, and these laws must be obeyed. And so Antigone defies her uncle, and she says, yes, I buried him, I tried to bury him, and I am answering to a higher authority, an authority that's higher than yours, uncle. And so he says, well, Antigone, you leave me no recourse. I'm going to have to condemn you to death. That was my decree. And I am going to condemn you to death. I'm going to condemn you to be walled up inside of a cave. And in that cave, you will eventually die. You will lose oxygen. There will be no air circulating, and you will die. And she says, yes, fine, do it. And so again, this is why Antigone is really quite famous through the generation. She stands up against authority in this way. And so she's hauled off to the cave, and an enormous boulder is rolled up in front of the mouth of the cave, and she is left there to perish. Well, it so happens that Antigone is the fiancée of Creon's son, Haman. Okay, and so Haman is the first one to come to Creon and plead with him and say, Father, this is my fiancée that you have walled up in this cave. Can you please show her some sort of mercy? Can you make an exception this time? Can you show mercy? I know that this is the letter of the law. This is why I'm coming to plead to you, because as the king, only you can revoke the law. Only you can show clemency. And Creon is hard-hearted. He's having nothing of it. He's saying, no, she's broken my law, and this is what her punishment is. And then that blind prophet Tiresias shows up. Tiresias always shows up, okay, like whenever something is going afoul in Thebes, okay. And Tiresias is a blind prophet. He's led by a boy, and because of his blindness, he can see the things that we cannot, that we typical people cannot see. And so Tiresias says to Creon, you are not heading down a good road. You are actually heading down the road of disaster. You have defied the laws of the gods, and the gods are very angry with you. And you have set into motion things that will bring about your downfall. I plead with you, because you are the king, that you can revoke this law, that you can make an exception, that you can show mercy, that you can show clemency. Your laws, your law, your absolute punishment, your punishment of the body not being buried, your punishment of Antigone goes against the natural order, and you will not come to a good end. So I beseech you to really change your position. And at that moment, Creon actually does change his position. He says, yes, perhaps I was too harsh. Perhaps this goes against the laws of the gods. Let's release Antigone. Please, please, soldiers, run off and release her. And of course, it's a tragedy. And no sooner do the soldiers get to the cave and they roll away the boulder that has imprisoned Antigone inside, that they find the dead body of Antigone. What Antigone has done is that she has hung herself. All right. And so this idea of incarceration and hanging herself while incarcerated, this is the scene that the soldiers come upon, and of course they're all like, couldn't she have waited or whatever, but, whether it was defiance, whether it was fear, whatever the reason, Antigone has hung herself in the cave where she was condemned to die. And as a result, Haman, her fiance, who deeply loved her, kills himself. And Creon's wife, she kills herself because her only son has killed himself. So she kills herself. And in the moment that she kills herself, she spits at Creon and she curses him. And so Creon is left with nothing. Okay, he's left with nothing. Now, this is what's fascinating about Greek tragedies. When I was studying them and performing in them at the Juilliard School of Drama, we were always told that the appeal of Greek tragedies was to create catharsis in the audience, to get the audiences to go, and to experience the feelings of the characters and themselves and have this kind of cathartic moment. My feeling about Greek drama, about Greek tragedies, has changed over the years, and it's kind of changed because of my understanding of astrology. What a Greek tragedy demonstrates is a dilemma. Okay, what it demonstrates is a moral dilemma. Okay, in which there's something right to both sides of the argument and something very wrong to both sides of the argument. There's no one clear winner. And then there's this kind of like inevitability of events that are sent forward as a result. And what is the result? The result is usually poor judgment on the part of the protagonists in the drama. Okay, they've been seized and there's a blindness. They show poor judgment in understanding the events that are taking place in their lives. It doesn't incriminate them, but they suffer as a result of that. And that is sort of kind of the kernel of tragedy. So, Antigone's argument is that she is following the god's law, and the god's law is higher than the law of the state. Okay. And she's following the god's law that dictate that people must be buried. But she's also, there's a personal investment at the same time. There's her personal understanding of the god's law. I mean, the gods haven't appeared to Antigone in a vision or sent signs and omens or even dictated a scroll that was dropped beside her pillow in the morning or something like that. Antigone has taken this entirely upon herself to bury her brother, which defies the law, and she's ready to die for it. So what we also see here in the story of Antigone is a true martyr. Perhaps you can begin to glean or recognize the Piscean themes that are beginning to come out here. And so she basically stakes out the moral high ground. Now, we understand morals as basically things that are passed down that teach us to understand and recognize the difference between right and wrong. This is morally correct. This is wrong or morally abhorrent. But morals, the word moral, its etymology comes from more. And more has been generally understood as customs that have been passed down, particularly through the family, customs that children are taught, as to be proper behavior. But moire also means habit. Okay, so it's a habit. It's a habitual way of being. Okay, so and the domain of morals was really the family, because this is where the customs or the habits or the proper way of seeing good and evil were taught in ancient Greece. It's the domain of the family. Okay, whereas the public or the civic domain, this is the domain of the institution. Okay, this is the domain of the regent power or the ruling power, who can make or unmake laws, and the laws are geared to rule over society. Not everyone may agree that the laws are good, and not everyone may agree that the laws are bad, but laws are put in place and the expectation is that they be followed. So the idea is that one's moral conscience, okay, and a moral conscience is our general understanding of it is, good and evil. If I've done something bad, that makes me feel bad and uncomfortable, and I must seek repentance or penitence in some way, or I'm just a horrible human being and I don't follow my moral conscience. Okay, so that's moral conscience. It's almost like a personal thing. And then there are the laws of the state, which are not personal. They're impersonal. They're fashioned to ensure the proper running of the state or the proper running of society. So when Antigone basically takes this higher moral ground, she is pitting her interpretation, okay, or her moral conscience. She is pitting her moral conscience against the state, okay, against the laws of Creon. And she's saying, I'm answering to a higher power. I'm answering to the power of the gods. I'm answering to good versus evil. And this is higher than anything you would decree. And this is what I'm answering to. This is what's right. It's right to bury a body after it dies. Okay. And so Creon is like, inflexible. He's inflexible, but he's not inflexible because he's like an obstinate, stubborn person. He's inflexible because he's protecting the interests of society that have been upset by this family drama that's been going on Oedipus's side of the fence. And so has he come down too hard on this? Yes, he has come down too hard on this. And it's often understood that, in the centuries that Antigone, has been passed down to us, it's often seen this argument, this debate between Creon and Antigone as tyranny, or absolute, totalitarianism. That's the word I'm looking for, as totalitarianism versus anarchy. That if we were to follow the whims of Antigone or our own moral conscience, and disregard everything else, then we're anarchists. We're without order. We're without civic responsibility. And so this is a conflict that the Greek audience very much understood. And even though Antigone was to them an abhorrent figure, a 14-year-old girl, lowest of the low in society, who is she to question a king? This is awful. At the same time, the king has gone against the will of the gods. He's gone too far, in his punishment. This is not a good thing. And so the audience members already know this isn't going to end well, and it doesn't end well, as I stated. But what remains to us is this clash, is this conflict. And of course, the gods punish Creon because you don't leave a body between worlds, okay? And this is kind of like, you sort of think it's more Plutonian, but it's actually very Neptunian. Okay, there is the world of the supernatural. There's the natural world, which one can take as Jupiter. Okay, and then there is Neptune, which is the supernatural world that also has its laws or its taboos. And so Creon breaks the laws twice. He breaks the laws by not burying the body of Polynices, and he breaks the law by walling up Antigone in a cave. She's buried alive. And so that is also a perversion. Okay, you don't bury people who are alive. So she's buried alive. And again, she is between worlds. And this is what brings down the wrath of the gods on Creon. So basically, what I'm sort of showing here or demonstrating, hopefully, is that Antigone is often seen as a play about civil disobedience. It's actually the first example of civil disobedience. But it also illustrates the difference between Sagittarius and Pisces, or rather the difference between the 9th house, which we often associate with Sagittarius, and the 12th house, which we often associate with Pisces. The 9th house, we associate to higher education, wisdom, philosophy, spiritual pursuits, and things like this. But to medieval astrologers in particular, and to older ones as well, the 9th house was pretty much understood as the church. Okay, definitely in the Middle Age period. The 9th house was understood as the church. Okay, and the institution of the church, as in the Catholic Church in Europe. And remember that astrology is one of astrology's chief patron in the Middle Ages is the Catholic Church. That's where the books of astrology are housed and curated, copied, and taken care of. If it weren't for the Catholic Church, we wouldn't have astrology, all right? Or if it weren't for the universities of Persia, we wouldn't have, or the academies of Persia, we wouldn't have astrology, because that's where those books were kept as well. So this wisdom, this knowledge, astrology as we know and practice it, has been preserved by religious institutions, all right, since its inception, really. And so that's kind of the 9th house. These are the rules, these are the laws, these are the things that you do, that you obey to not only be a good person, but because this is the realm of the 9th house, but to be a proper a citizen, to be a proper civic citizen. These are the rules and the laws that you obey in order to be an upstanding member of society, might be the current way that we might put it. And so this is religion as an institution and as scripture. The impulse of the 12th house, or the domain of the 12th house, is very different. The domain of the 12th house is the domain of the supernatural. It's the domain of the mystic. Okay, and I've probably mentioned on these episodes before, mystics in the history of religion were eyed really quite suspiciously and very warily, because on one hand, a doctrinal church, needed mystics with their visions and with their messages from the divine. They needed that to prove that the miraculous still appeared in this world. Okay, that the church hadn't deadened everything under the weight of scripture, but that you could still have these epiphanies, you could still have these visions, you could still have people who were seized by the spirit or the divine, and that they were seen as being wiser than the wise, than the learned in religion, and so they were celebrated in regards. But at the same time, they were also feared, because mystics could go a little extreme. Okay, mystics could say, overthrow the Pope. He's taking money for your soul in limbo, and no one decides these things but God. So overthrow the Pope, fight back against religion, and all these sorts of things. And this is what mystics could do. This is why Joan of Arc was burned at the stake, and this is why Greta Thunberg makes officials at different international conferences very uncomfortable. Okay, it's someone who seized the imagination of the crowd, of the people, and is now, and is answering to a higher authority. In Greta's case, she's answering to the higher authority of Mother Nature herself. Okay, and wielding that against institutions, corporations, governments around the world. So mystics, even to this day, have a very powerful voice, and are, again, regarded in this very mixed way. On one hand, if you're for Greta, you're walking out of school, your job or whatever, you're protesting, you're trying to raise awareness, and stop the end of our planet, which is being brought about by greedy corporate people and things like this. And then if you're on the side of government or institutions, you look at Greta as a frightening figure because she's going to upset the way that you run things or the way that things are processed in society. She's not really recognizing that there's a protocol or there's etiquette and these sorts of things. So this creates a tension. Hundreds of years ago, they might very well have burned Greta at the stake. But nowadays that will not happen, and that's a good thing. That shows progress on our part. So what we have with this Sun in Sagittarius, which is very much about belief, and beliefs, and beliefs are meant to be reinforced. Beliefs aren't up to questioning. If you take it to the ultimate, extreme, beliefs are not to be questioned, they're to be believed. And so, and beliefs, when they are questioned, will respond by either getting more dictatorial or dogmatic, I guess is the more proper way of saying it. But beliefs, when questioned or challenged, can also sprout extraordinary rationales and excuses and reasons to believe like this. Beliefs become a sort of self-fulfilling, ideology. But that's not the 12th house. The 12th house exists in a place without belief. It exists in a place of mystery and experiences of mystery and experiences of wonder. And it exists in that place where you're standing on the threshold between the known world and the invisible world. And some people may say, oh, you know the truth. And other people might say, you sound like you're insane. So this is the area of the 12th house. And this is what's being brought into square this week. So what I want you to think about in terms of the square, and it may end up manifesting as something very simple as disillusionment, the scales falling from your eyes or the rose-colored glasses being taken off. That's a very real and recognizable possibility and probability. But what I really want you to reflect upon, to meditate upon with this approaching square is the nature of the square itself, between what is seen and believed and is right, maybe even a duty to your society, and then what is moral, what exists beyond that, what is true to whatever you would regard as a higher power, which may be in conflict, to what the expectations are in society. Now, squares, we will often tell you as astrologers, are combative. They can be competitive. But my feeling about a square is that it's very much about a struggle between two planets that have two very determined points of view. And we tend to see struggles and fights as in terms of who wins and who loses. But what we don't always often recognize or respect is what a struggle brings about. And what a struggle brings about with these two planets, the Sun and Neptune, is a raising of consciousness, not its resolution. And that's what I want you to think about when these planets square this week, to sort of embrace the process of your consciousness being raised beyond something that requires simple answers or immediate resolution.
Thanks for tuning in to the Astrology Hub Podcast Network. If you love the show, please take a moment to subscribe, rate, review, and share it. And if you don't know how to do that, here's how you can leave a review in Apple Podcasts on iPhone. Make sure you're on the landing page for the Astrology Hub podcast and not an individual episode. Scroll down to the bottom until you reach ratings and reviews. Click one of the 5 stars under Tap to Rate to leave a rating, and under the most recent review, tap the Write a Review button. And if you're on another device, just find out how to leave a review on whatever podcast player you use. Then, Share what you love about the show or how it helps you navigate your life. We'd love to hear your stories, and by doing this, you make it possible to make shows like Horoscope Highlights happen every week. Thank you again for tuning in, for being a part of our community, and for making astrology a part of your life.